The first time I saw her, she was standing at the train station, staring into the distance as if waiting for someone who would never come. Her dark hair caught in the wind, and for a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes. Something hollow, something searching. I approached her, pretending to check my watch, but in truth, I only wanted a reason to stand close. She turned to me, lips curling slightly. That was the beginning. Our dates were always late in the evening, under flickering streetlights, or in the corners of empty diners. She never liked bright places. Said they gave her headaches. I never pressed. There was something about her that made questions feel intrusive, like knocking on a door that shouldn't be opened. She laughed at my jokes, but sometimes, mid-laugh, her face would shift into something unreadable, as if she was remembering something she wished she could forget. One night, she led me to a small park at the edge of the city. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves, the moon barely visible through the skeletal trees. She walked ahead, her silhouette barely distinguishable from the shadows. I followed, drawn in by an unspoken pull. She stopped at a bench, ran her fingers over the wood as if it meant something to her. When she finally sat, she looked up at me with an expression I couldn't place. Something between sadness and longing. "You ever feel like you don't belong?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, though I didn't understand what she truly meant. She didn't elaborate, just took my hand and squeezed it. Her fingers were ice cold. A shiver crawled down my spine. As the weeks passed, strange things started happening. Lights flickered when she entered a room. My phone battery drained whenever she called. I began waking up in the middle of the night with the distinct feeling that someone had been in my room, standing at the foot of my bed. I told myself it was paranoia. I told myself it was love twisting my mind into something irrational. But deep down, I knew better. One night, as we walked along the river, she stopped suddenly, gripping my wrist so tightly it hurt. Her eyes were wide, pupils dilated. "Do you hear that?" she asked. I listened. The wind, the rustling leaves, the distant hum of the city. "Hear what?" She shook her head, pulling me along. "Never mind." But I did hear something later that night, just as I was drifting off to sleep. A soft whisper, just outside my window. My name. I shot up in bed, heart hammering. The window was closed, the curtains still. Yet the whisper remained, curling around the edges of my consciousness like smoke. I barely slept, and when I met her the next day, I nearly told her about it. But she looked different, paler, her movements slower. Something in me knew she already knew. By the time winter settled in, she grew more distant. She stopped calling as often, stopped meeting me in familiar places. I searched for her in the spots we used to frequent, but it was like she had never been there at all. Then one night, she appeared outside my apartment, soaked from the rain, eyes filled with something like desperation. "I can't stay," she whispered. "I wanted to, but I can't." I asked her what she meant, but she just shook her head. When I reached out to touch her, she stepped back, her skin pale as marble. "Just promise me one thing," she said. "Don't follow me." Then she turned and walked away. I watched her disappear down the street, the mist swallowing her whole. And that was it. But I couldn't let go. Not like that. Not without answers. I searched for her. Asked around. No one seemed to know who I was talking about. It was as if she had never existed. I went to the train station where we first met, looked for any trace of her. Nothing. My chest felt hollow, my head a maze of unanswered questions. Then one evening, I found myself in the park she loved, standing by the bench where we once sat. The air was thick, heavy with an unnatural silence. I ran my fingers over the wood, just as she had, and then I saw it. A name, carved deep into the wood. Her name. My blood turned to ice. I stumbled back, breath hitching. The name wasn't alone. There was a date beneath it. November 12th, 1987. My pulse pounded in my ears. That was impossible. The date of death. I turned, half expecting to see her standing there watching. But there was nothing. Just the cold wind and the empty park. My breath came in ragged gasps. The weight of realization crushed me. She had never belonged here. I had been in love with a ghost.